Episode 191 Above Ground Podcast, The Battle of Evermore.
Disclaimer. The hosts of this podcast, Will Foley and TPP, are not medical professionals, and this is not medical advice. Both Will and TPP have first-hand experience with mental illness. They have their own perspective and own thoughts on mental health challenges. Above Ground Podcast was birthed to help those who struggle with their mental health through honest dialogue. By speaking openly and sharing tools, they foster connection. By fostering connection, they convey hope. With connection and hope, we can continue to increase awareness. These conversations aim to break down the walls while building stronger foundations for positive mental health. This is Above Ground Podcast.
Coming at you live with real conversations about mental health from the perspective. It's time for Above Ground Podcast. Now your hosts, TPP and Will Foley. Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to episode 191 of
Above Ground Podcast.
Above Ground Podcast, because you can't serve below.
No, you cannot.
And you know what we are entering in? We are entering into the Battle of Evermore. The battle of our minds. That's right.
It's a battle, everybody.
It's a battle royale.
It's a battle royale.
And all those emotions, they're all the wrestlers running down to the ring one by one. Fear, guilt, depression, mayhem, despair. They're all in there. They're battling it out for your mind. Oh.
Here comes bipolar.
Bipolar.
Off the top rope with...
Well, that's a condition, though. That's not an emotion.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
I got a little...
So, you got a little carried away.
I tried to
there.
be part of the party.
Bipolar's actually the announcer.
Okay, there we go.
The bipolar rock and roller.
So what are we talking about, Will?
Well, we're talking about the battle of the mind, man. The mind is dangerous. And maybe that our mind could pose the biggest hurdle that we have. And how do we get over those hurdles?
I believe so.
You do.
I do.
How do you flip the script on the mind and realize that the power goes both ways? How do you do that? Because the mind can work as a very positive thing, but it can work as a very negative thing, that yin and yang, that balance. Because it's okay to have some negative thoughts about things. I mean, and it's healthy to have positive thoughts. So how do you weigh that battle? Like when you put those things on the scale.
Yeah, I think, like you said, balance. I think allowing yourself to, number one, have compassion for yourself, and then, be open enough to agree with some of it and be okay with not agreeing with some of it.
So by not agreeing with some of it, we question it. Is that how we start? We start questioning? Because we always talk about, believing all the stuff that we
becoming
hear,
aware.
Feel.
And zeroing in and maybe dissecting it and asking the questions, for each tentacle or whatever have you.
What happens, though, if you're scared of your mind? What happens if you're scared of finding that, A, you're either more powerful and smart than you think you are, or what happens if you're not as smart as you think you are? Are you afraid of that, too? Because I think that does pose a problem with people.
Yeah?
Yeah, I think people think that they know more than they really do.
Yeah.
And it comes to humility again of being able to say that you don't know as much as you do. Because I got to say, man, I know less now than I did 20 years ago. Because what I've done is I've gone back to really understanding why I feel the way I feel, why I think the way I think, and what that's done to me over the years. And it's only been in the last few years or so that I've really come to realize that now I'm putting the pieces back together.
Are you when you say you realize it, you mean you realize that it was your own thoughts that created these?
It was my own thoughts that created the reality I had, whether it was the thoughts of what I believe somebody thought of me, or worse, what I thought of myself.
Right.
And
which we've talked about before, and you think about what you think about yourself isn't necessarily always true.
Right. And how other people view you is a lot different than you view yourself.
Right.
And we've talked about that.
But I think the main kicker is whether it's true or not, when it's in your mind, you tend to believe it.
That's true. We believe everything that's in our mind is accurate.
Right.
And it's not.
No.
They're just thoughts. And how many thoughts do we have a day? Like 3 million thoughts a day, random thoughts a day that we just... However, I've realized this, though. If we have that many thoughts, most of those thoughts surround the same things. Lack, limitation, doubt, absolutely. At least I think that's what people do, is they spend time on the mental treadmill running back and forth between doubt and limitation and lack and divide and not and separateness as opposed to being whole. And I don't know if wholeness is a byproduct of having your mind straight, or if wholeness is actually a thought of mind.
That's a good... Oof. I think, in my opinion, wholeness is body and mind that are more in tune. You know, I think.
Do you think healing plays into that, though?
Yeah, for sure. But I can't think of the word I want to use. But I think it's because I don't know. I'm more on the cognitive side of things where, it starts with the thought, and then the thought creates, the action or whatever, emotion, and then the action, thinking, feeling, and then doing.
Is it the chicken or the egg?
Yeah, I know, but I'm just
because I realize now, like after all these years of hearing that saying, I understand what that means now. It's like, is it the chicken or the egg first? Because somebody had to create the egg, right? Or something had to happen to create that egg. So, is it the chicken or the egg? And is it? What were you going to say?
Well, no, I was just going to say one way to kind of help kind of, I guess, get a clearer picture would be to focus on the states of mind. So there's the reasonable mind, or some people call it the rational mind. There is, on the other end, there's the emotional mind. And in the middle is the wise mind, which obviously that would be a great place to be.
So the wise mind is where wisdom comes from. Correct. So you have to take. So it's the. Go through that again. I'm sorry.
The reasonable mind, or rational mind.
Yeah. Or the emotional mind.
And on the other end is the emotional mind, and then in the middle is the wise mind. Like you said, that's where the wisdom comes. I think the wise mind is the middle path.
Right.
Because,
I get that.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So it's bringing it's part reasonable and part emotional. You know what I mean? It's a nice balance. It's a nice blend.
It's a nice blend. It's like that good rhythm in the headphones.
But if you're stuck far on the emotional mind, that's very emotion focused. And if you're focused on the emotion, like you said, some of the emotions, you're feeling it, but the reason why you're feeling it may be false. And you know how it can be if you're ruled by your emotions, and if you're ruled by your moods, and you know what I mean? If you
as
don't
I have
that,
been for many years.
Right. If you don't have that emotional regulation, as I like to say, it can wreak havoc.
But what happens if you get stuck in the rational mind and you become cynical and jaded? Because I really do think that that's what happens, though, and I think that the balanced person has that middle way of blending them both in a nice mixture.
In the reasonable mind, you're ruled by facts, reason, logic. Values and feelings aren't necessarily in the mix. It's the one side. It's almost like the opposite of the emotional mind.
Sure.
So
try listening to the first couple Van Halen records without headphones. or with headphones, and then take one can off your ear, and you'll hear what a rational mind and an emotional mind is, because when you hear the mix, some of the instruments aren't in the same thing. So it's like, whoa, wait a second, why am I only hearing Michael Anthony and David Lee Roth, and I'm not hearing Eddie Van Halen at all? Like, you're not hearing the guitars at all. So we get a bad mix if we're too far on either side, where the middle path blends. It's A-B.
It's a good blend. It's a good blend. Yeah, it's a good blend. It's a good place to be. I think, which we've talked about before, doing, if you're more in the wise mind, that's when you can say to yourself, like, almost like stop and say, is this what I'm thinking real? Is it fact or fiction? Or is these behaviors that I'm doing, are they, helpful or are they hurtful?
That's in the middle.
Right.
The middle way.
Yeah.
But being able to question things without making them about yourself, and just question the things.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Because I'm really, like, you would think that rational thought would be good too, but having too much of that can create, you got to have proof. You can't. So that means faith falls out of that, because which granted,
although some people would probably argue, but.
Well, yeah, some people probably would argue, but that argument would be lost on me, because personally, I think if you have too much rational thought, you would be like, "What the fuck was that all about?" That's you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I agree.
In rationale, you're like, I think, okay, were you on drugs when you wrote that?
I think certain times, certain situations, it might even be better to be a little bit more on the rational side of things.
Sure, there's always a balance. I mean, you can mix the balance, because. Just because in unity, it's okay. Sometimes you got to have that to the left a little bit, because you may not want that guitar solo completely blasting out both ears.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep. And I think the overall will help kind of make it so your mind isn't as dangerous. You know what I mean?
Do you think the mind is dangerous when it's stuck in one or the other? Do you think that's where
that? Let me say this: I don't know if I would say the mind itself is dangerous, but it can lead to dangerous things.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Because like emotional dysregulation, impulsivity, those kinds of things. Like, you think that. But do you think that those things stem from being too stuck in one way or the other? Or do you think that it's possible to?
I think that, I don't know if it's that black and white, but I do think that's a huge part of it. I think being stuck, having those thoughts are, more based on, again, the situations that got us to where we are now, so, childhood experiences and situations through our life and to where we are now combined, that can, I think that itself will dictate where you're going to be, more in the wise mind, more in the emotional mind. And if you're, stuck, like with anything, if you're stuck in depression, it's a bitch to get out.
Yeah, it is a bitch to get out.
So if you're stuck in the emotional mind, you are going to be blind to the facts.
But here's the thing, though. Do you think you can still be stuck in depression and be rational? Because the way it seems is
I think so.
Like you can't, because if you were rational, no, I'm not saying I'm not voicing my opinion about it. I'm asking the question, because that's kind of the way it sounded when you made the comment about being stuck in the emotional mind, and I just wonder if sometimes too much rationality does the same thing, because you can question things till the sun comes up and goes down, but that doesn't get you any further either. So that's almost this two sides of the same coin, right?
Could be.
Because, I mean, you need emotion. Emotion does serve a purpose.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Just like rationale serves a purpose.
Right, and I think that's why I think depending on the situation you're in, emotion definitely serves a purpose, but as we mentioned numerous times before, with like things like anxiety, is if you're stuck there, and it's becomes a compulsion. If you are stuck in the emotional mind and you're always, you know what I mean? You're always raging. You're always controlled by your emotions. That's a dangerous path.
And I think the same thing comes from the irrational mind,
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
You can certainly be stuck in the rational mind. And
I just used emotional, right. But you can be stuck and again, I think that could be just as dangerous, because if you're basing, I think for some reason I'm envisioning more of like a big corporation is going to be, these are the facts, and they're not thinking of the workers that are, you know what I mean? There's no kind of emotion.
Well, systems don't think of people
Right.
because systems aren't made to think of people.
Right.
Systems do exactly what systems are supposed to do. So it's not exactly, it's the people that make the choices about how those systems work and what those systems become and how those
Yes.
systems are cultivated.
Right. Yep. For sure.
Within the rational mind, though, how do you start tapping into one or the other if you are a little bit too emotional, or if you're a little too rational and you're like you become cynical? Like, how do you start integrating some of the other parts of yourself into the picture now to bring it more center? How do you get the mix down right?
I think by, doing any kind of grounding is going to be a big help. Being able to kind of step back for a second and take a couple deep breaths.
Okay. Do you think a rational mind, though,
yeah,
can focus on those things? I mean, I don't think in an irregulated emotional mind that you can concentrate on those things. So I wonder if in an irregular regulated mind or rational mind, if you can actually grasp those things either.
Although I this is just me. I feel like in the rational mind, you have a better shot of doing it than if you were in the emotional mind. I think because in the rational mind, if you're being rational about it, there's a problem that needs to be solved. So in your mind, you're going to solve that problem.
But does it create more problems by trying to solve that problem?
Sure.
Because
that's the question.
Because that's really what it's about, I guess, at the essence of it, is that battle of, okay, what needs to be fixed? What do I accept? And then what creates the whole?
Right. Yeah, so I think, again, at the heart of it all is just being aware. Because without being mindful of it, you just go into the battle with what you got, and
you just go in blindly.
Yeah. And maybe that's more emotional mind, but you need to kind of, before the battle, maybe get battle ready and put on some armor and be like, think to yourself, okay, I need to kind of go at this with emotion, but almost like controlled emotion, be able to kind of think on your feet, navigate through things without being stuck.
So being in the middle is just a good combination of the rational and emotional.
Correct.
Remotional.
Remotional, yes.
Remotional. Yeah. I got a remotional rhyme now. I'm all cool, man. I'm in the middle, man.
I think the middle is where you would just it's less being, it's less doing. It's almost letting, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I was, because it's interesting that you chose those words, because it is almost letting. Isn't that's what the middle way is all about? It's all about just being able to to go through and then not
kind of let go
of the things that you have no control over.
Right.
And then not be overly controlling of the things you do have control over.
Right.
Which makes it hard for a rational person, because a rational person is going to say, well, I can control variable A, B, and C, so why does D matter if I can control the rest?
Bingo.
But it's the fact that D makes up the rest of it.
Yeah. So even though that they're, as you like to say, even though they're separate, they're still part of the...
Nothing is separate.
Right.
That's the thing. That's the weird thing about stuff, is that nothing is separate, even though we're just taught a bunch of separateness.
Right.
Which makes it pretty hard for us to go with a rational mind and say, well, how could this be if this, or in a rational mind, you're like, well, if part A doesn't add up to part B and part C doesn't fit either, then none of it fits.
So let me ask you this, with kind of just going by what we were just talking about with the three. Do you think there is I guess the middle. I just answered my question. I'm thinking like which one would be more you'd be more present in?
Well, I think the middle is where you're present.
Okay.
However, if you look at it in a sense of, I mean, that's the perfect thing. Like, you try and stand for 5 minutes and just be and pay attention to your breath.
Right.
Count to 4, count to 4, count to 4. And in your rational mind may say, well, why am I standing here counting to 4? I can concentrate on this. This is easy. It's only 5 minutes. And then the emotional brain's like, I don't want to stand here for 5 minutes. I don't want to do anything. Your emotional mind says, I don't want to do anything. I just want to go and sit on my couch and Netflix and chill.
Yeah.
Because that's what happens in the emotional mind. But I do think that mindfulness starts in the rational mind, because I think in order to really look at things, you have to be mindful. But I think it overflows into the emotional mind, because then you have to figure out, okay, why are my emotions affecting me in the way that they're affecting me? And is this something that I can control? Mm-hmm. And is this controllable? And I don't know if every situation is controllable. How you feel about situations is controllable if you have the development to make those discernments. Okay?
I agree.
There are things, children will never be able to do this because they don't have the capacity to do that.
Right.
Because it's not developed yet.
Yeah, the prefrontal cortex is, they say it can, up to like 25.
Yeah, it's 27,
Yeah.
I've heard. Yeah, dude. It's crazy to think
It is.
that.
It is
It's crazy to think back to my age and what I was doing at those ages. And now I wonder, that at 25, I was a completely just whatever. And now
Gold
25 years later.
Gold thong wearing silly boy.
Yeah, I mean, shit, that was 97. I was 25, man. That was the end of Freak Nation. I think about all the things I did leading up to that, man. It's crazy. I left Freak Nation in 97, and I was 25 years old, dude. I thought my life was over.
Wow, that is insane.
I did. I thought I was done. Actually, it's funny because 25 years later, I'm thinking about doing the same thing that I was thinking about doing at 25.
Which is what...
My intent when I left Freak Nation was to go back to school to get my KSAC. It really was.
Really?
Yeah. I even that was part of the reason why I was leaving. And I just never.
I don't think I knew that.
I never pursued it. And then, and it's crazy because I'm heading to 51 soon, and I've literally lived a circle of life in the last. It's crazy, man. But our cycles really do repeat if we don't acknowledge them and then don't try to regroup them and try to send them in a different direction. And a lot of the things that I've been going through in the last year reflect that I haven't cleaned up some of the cycles. And, well, 2023 is a new year.
Exactly. I mean, again, as you know, depending on how many dump truck loads of shit there's dumped in front of you, this takes time. It's not, healing isn't for the weak.
No, it's not. But you can have a bunch of dirt dumped on your thing, and you can create one hell of a motocross track though with that shit.
You could have a little fun.
Have a little fun. Make it
you
fun.
should have. Well,
you should
exactly.
have fun.
You should have fun because it's about the journey.
I think about all the years I didn't have fun, and I look back at all those missed moments.
You can't do that.
And it's like, it's sad because
it is, but yeah. You can't.
I'm not saying that.
No,
I look back on them all the time, but I've looked back on a lot of the things that I've been in and not been present for, and then you realize you're still.
While you do that, you're thinking, as you just said, looking back on some of the things you weren't present for, what amount of those things were because of your thinking. And
most of them
Yeah.
were because of my thinking or the way I thought about a certain thing or stuff that I had that I didn't even realize I had that had come up.
pretty wild, huh?
It is, but it does go to show though that once you start to break down that wall, the wall just comes down, dude. And
You think as
unfortunately,
you start breaking it down, it comes down, it's easier?
yes. And I think it's easier for you to put the pieces, it's easier for you to recognize things. However, rebuilding something new, that's completely not in my wheelhouse right now. I'm trying to rebuild myself.
Right.
Because that's the
sometimes
only
we
person,
just don't
that's the only
have
thing that I can rebuild.
The mental space to do that, though,
No, but I also give myself the grace to realize I can't have the same amount of space. I just can't.
Right.
I just can't.
Yeah.
And that's not a worthiness question. It's not that I'm not worthy to have that ability. It's that I just don't have that ability available to me right now because I've got other things that are taking up that space.
Yeah. No, it's understandable for sure.
So
Right. And it's good to have that grace is what I'm saying, to have that kind of self-compassion and say to yourself like, hey, you know what? Right now isn't necessarily the time to do this, but I'm going to do it soon, reconvene, and when I have some more space, add stuff in when I'm able to. I think that's huge, being able to do that kind of thing. I think you need to be able to do that thing to continue on your healing journey.
Well, you have to, and you have to allow yourself some grace.
Yeah.
Although it is one of the hardest things to allow yourself. Especially, a couple episodes back, we talked about low self-opinion. And if you have a low self-opinion of yourself,
Right.
then unfortunately, you not only teach people how to treat you, you will treat people in a different way than you treat yourself.
Right.
Which is a definite issue because that causes all kinds of other things to layer on top and not layer on top and layer on top. And again, at some point when you're producing a track, you got to figure out what enough is enough and when the track is done. And if you don't have that ability to say, oh my God, I'm not worthy of this track, you're going to keep adding stuff, and you're going to think of something else. You're going to think of another rhythm. You're going to think of another line.
Stepping away from that track, stepping away and maybe coming back with fresh ears.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. That's one of the biggest things with mixing is fresh ears. And that's why after you've been doing it for 2 or 3 hours, you need to walk away and do something different for a little bit.
I'm just thinking, using it as if we can allow ourselves a timeout and step away from the situation that we're in and, take a couple breaths,
Yeah.
It could be beneficial.
Something as simple as just getting up, getting yourself something to drink, going to the bathroom, just clearing out the cobwebs. Like, I mean, we talk about music all the time, and I know one of the big things, like Pearl Jam, back when they were recording a lot, like the first couple albums, like when they were in the studio, like they would go out and play basketball every day.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah, they were all, like, they're all big NBA fans. And being from Seattle, Supersonics and stuff. But
I knew the bass player because he's one that wears the jerseys.
yeah,
right?
he always wears basketball jerseys. But they actually would go out during the recording sessions and play basketball, just like you see a lot of the European artists, like Bob Marley. You see in the old photos,
right.
Rod Stewart kicking the soccer ball around.
Really?
Because it's like Oasis. Because it's that thing that kind of gets you away from something. It kind of gives you a reset, and it's a familiar reset. And a familiar reset will help you come back off of those poles of whether the rational or the emotional and bring you back to center.
Do you think that it would be helpful to almost practice these things?
Yeah, I think that you have to.
Yeah.
I mean, it can be a distraction, but I think if you find something that but we lose those things because there's things that we learn as kids that keep us going, right? We play as kids. Like I kept myself occupied all the time. I had tons of plastic army men and cowboys and Indians and all those little plastic figures because they were the perfect size for my small little sausage fingers. and they were easy because I could create worlds. I could create all the storylines that I wanted to create, and it allowed me to get out of myself. But what it also allowed me to do is realize that there's these little moments in the day where you can reset, and you just have to find new ways to reset. Because you may not be able to, if you work in an office and you're playing with some army men or some figures on your desk, some people might be a little questionable about that, but so be it. Let them be a question. Let them question it. If that's really how your mind works, then do it. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
And in order to bring yourself back to center, you need to be able to recognize that you're too far out on one side or the other, and then you need to learn how to restrain and bring it back together, which is very hard, especially if you're stuck in the emotional mind. The rational mind will give you all the facts and figures about why you want to take your life and why it's not a good idea and what the statistics are. But the emotional mind says, I want to die. I feel like the biggest loser and piece of shit there is, and I want to die.
So
how do you get back? So how do you get back to center and say, wait a second, I have these feelings. These emotions are not necessarily all real because my brain is trying to kill me. How do you bring yourself back?
I mean, it's a tough call. My thing is to try not to be more proactive, to try not to let yourself get that far.
Sometimes it's hard though, because sometimes you don't even recognize that you've gotten that far.
I know. I'm not saying it's easy, and I'm not saying it's always possible. I'm just saying like that would be something that I try to. Me personally, I try to make sure, my sleeping habits are good, my eating habits are good, I'm drinking water, I'm walking, some of those things that, are part of it, and once you get into those grips, they kind of rob you from the things that you need to get out.
Well, they actually rob you of the ability to see the whole picture.
That too, yeah. So I think it clouds like the whole thing, your wise mind, your rational mind, your emotional mind. But I like that you were talking about like the emotional mind and the rational mind with the suicide, because
and I think that's what a lot of it is.
Yeah.
However, I mean, that rational mind can be, can affect that also.
yeah,
Because
no, absolutely. You know, I think that's why it's like the middle path is the balance. You know what I mean? The balance, that we kind of all want to attain someday. So yeah, so battle up, battle ready.
The
Whatever you
battle
gotta do.
Well, the battle with your mind is something that you're going to have to deal with for a very long time, as long as you're on this planet.
Yeah,
Now,
I think though, if you can learn some of these things, and if you can begin to stop yourself from reacting and learn to respond, and create these new habits, I think it would be, in time, it would be more beneficial, obviously, but it will also, I think it'll be the default. You won't be so quick on the trigger.
creating the habits takes a little bit more of the rational mind and takes a little bit out of the emotional mind. So you have to be able to access that rational mind enough to say, wow, if I start doing this might feel better, this might be better, or I might be better, or I might feel better.
I mean, just being able to recognize and realize that you have the power over the mind. You can stop and say, is this something that is sabotaging me, or is this something that is helpful to me? Question things, continue to question things, and if you can create these patterns of that, in time you can take the needle off the record and skip the track.
Yeah, and you never know what's on that next track. Might be something really good. It's a deep cut.
Deep cut, baby.
A deep cut, man. AOR radio, hey.
Listen to Deep Cuts on Above Ground Podcast.
That's right, deep cuts. That rational mind, that emotional mind, how are you balancing the two? And do you recognize when you're stuck in one or the other? And can you pull yourself out of that mindset? The battle of the mind is the battle of evermore, man.
This is true.
It
on that
is.
note.
And on that note, man, until next time, get well.
Be safe.
Stay
above.
Above.
Thank you for giving us a listen. New episodes every Wednesday. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, you can share, rate, review, and even subscribe so you'll never miss an episode. Other ways to support the show: follow us on social media, share the content, share our episodes. You can also buy us a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/abovegroundpod. For further concerns, show ideas, or just to say hi, you can email us at abovegroundpodcast@gmail.com. Once again, thank you for listening and supporting mental health. Keep the conversation going and stay above.